Good morning. I'm Leif Nelson. Thanks for coming to the Data Colada seminar series. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Joowon Klusowski, who will be speaking to us. In addition, we have a number of great panelists, Jonathan Berman, Dan Filer, Don Moore, and Deb Small. On top of that, of course, as always, Joe Simmons and Yuri Simonson will be with us for all of this. For those of you who haven't been here before, during the talk, you can submit questions or comments through the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Those will be able to be seen by all of the panelists and by Joowon. Presumably she will be too busy talking to actually read them, but don't worry, we will be able to and give voice to them when we can. And even if we don't have a chance to give voice to your question, it all gets recorded and we can share it with her at the end of the session. So with all that out of the way, Joowon.
Thank you for having me. I'd also like to thank everyone who's on the participant list. I know I can't see your faces, but I would love to make this fun and engaging for you. So please send in comments and questions. So I'm very excited to share with everyone today my research with Deb and Joe. In this research, we examine whether choice causes an illusion of control. Now, I think everyone's familiar with the word choice, but not everyone may be familiar with the concept illusion of control or what this question means. So I'd like to start today's talk by explaining a little bit about why we started working on this particular problem and also why it's so important in understanding choice. So we started working on this problem because we're wondering, well, what exactly does choice do? So specifically, what exactly is the benefit of having a choice? There's a lot of emphasis on giving people greater choices. So for example, there are companies that try to allow customers to choose their favorite options and customize their products. And perhaps in a more consequential domain, there are also healthcare providers who talk about giving patients greater choices over their treatment options or physicians. But at the same time, there are also these decision algorithms nowadays, such as product recommendation algorithms or investment algorithms that can make some of these important choices for us. And they're also getting pretty good at matching our preferences, meaning they're also getting pretty good at picking the options that we would have chosen ourselves. So given that, what exactly is the benefit of having a choice compared to having the exact same choices made by others? So one thing we know is that choice has an obvious benefit. When you have a choice, you can just select the better option. Whereas when you don't have a choice, you may end up with a worse option. So it makes sense that a lot of the times having a choice helps because it does make you more likely to achieve the better outcome. But research also says that choice has an additional benefit on top of this. So for example, even in contexts where all choice options are identical, they're all equally good or bad. So even in contexts where choice cannot make you any more likely to select the better outcome, it still has an important effect. And perhaps the strongest evidence for this kind of claim comes from studies using lottery tickets. Because as you know, in a standard lottery, choosing your own ticket does not make you any more likely to select the winning ticket or to win the lottery. But past studies argued that people who chose their own lottery ticket felt more likely to win than people who were assigned a ticket, despite the fact that all the tickets had an identical chance of winning. So based on this evidence, researchers have believed for the past 45 years that choice causes what's called an illusion of control. And what that means is, even in contexts where choice cannot give you any actual control over the outcomes, it can still give you a sense of control. This feeling that you can influence the outcomes such that you are more likely to realize your preferred outcome when you have a choice. And because sense of control is hypothesized to have a lot of impact on people's financial, psychological, or even physical well-being, this research has served as evidence that even when choice is inconsequential, it can have these powerful welfare effects, or beyond just allowing people the better options that they want, choice can confer these additional benefits. And this notion has been highly influential and widely accepted. Over 6,000 articles have cited this original paper introducing this effect. And also many of these citing references describe this effect as ground truth. So for example, here's a quote from a seminal paper on choice by Iyengar and Lipper. Many important theories all presume that even purely illusory perceptions of choice will have powerful effects. Here's another quote from a classic textbook by Aronson. The illusion of control is a powerful one. It is small wonder, it is not surprising, that most state lotteries allow us to select our own numbers. So you see how we've been sort of taking this effect as ground truth. Now, despite the widespread acceptance of this notion, we started questioning whether choice truly causes an illusion of control. And there are three reasons we started questioning this claim. They have to do with the dependent variables, the independent variables, and the causal inference between them in past research. So the first issue had to do with the dependent variables in the original studies. So even though these earlier studies are famous for showing that participants felt more likely to win when they chose a ticket themselves, surprisingly, they actually never measured how likely participants felt they were to win these lotteries. Instead, what they measured was how reluctant people were to sell or exchange their tickets. Looking at these two constructs, you might think that they're closely related, and in fact, they are. If you feel more likely to win with that ticket that you have, then you should be more reluctant to sell or exchange their ticket. But the problem here is that the converse isn't necessarily true. So just because participants in these studies felt greater reluctance to sell or exchange their ticket after choosing a ticket themselves does not necessarily mean that they felt more likely to win. There are at least two alternative explanations that could sort of like address why participants in the choice condition may have been more reluctant to sell or exchange their ticket. And one of them is just a mere liking for the ticket. So in the original studies, the lottery tickets featured different letters of the alphabet or famous football players. So what that means is if you had a choice, you could have just picked a ticket with your initial on it. And a lot of participants actually reported doing that. And then when you're asked, do you want to sell or exchange your ticket? You might have said no, because it has my initial on it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I felt more likely to win with that ticket. The other alternative explanation is anticipated regret. So we know from research that active actions tend to trigger greater anticipated regret. So if you're thinking about participants who had already chosen a ticket, and then if you're thinking about exchanging it, you might have expected greater regret, because what if you already chose a ticket and then you ended up selling it and then that ticket ends up winning? So there are reasons to suspect that people in this condition may not have actually felt more likely to win in these lotteries. Now, there were some later studies that are showing illusion of control with dependent variables that are more closely capturing likelihood, but they can't really serve as evidence that choice caused an illusion of control, because a lot of those studies did not just focus on choice, they just focused on probing like a general illusion of control phenomenon. So a lot of the times participants in the treatment conditions in those studies, they not only had a choice, but they also had other forms of active involvement. So for example, participants in the treatment condition in those studies, they not only chose a lottery number themselves, but they also got to throw the dice themselves or spin the roulette wheel themselves. So we can't really isolate the effects of choice. Now, there's also a third issue, which has to do with the causal inference in previous research. So I talked about the issues with the dependent variable and the issues with the independent variables. But let's imagine that we all fix that. So let's imagine that we really try to measure people's likelihood and we really only manipulated choice. And then we found that participants in the choice condition actually felt more likely to win than participants in the no choice condition. That clearly is an illusion, because choosing your own ticket should not influence your likelihood of winning. But the question here is, did the choice cause this illusion? It's going to depend, and I will explain why. So imagine I gave you this lottery with 3 boxes. One of them is a winner with a bonus, but the other ones are empty, and you don't know which one's the winner. Now imagine that before doing anything, so before choosing or being assigned any of these boxes, you felt like all these lottery boxes were equally likely to win, as you almost should. So if I were to plot your subjective probability of winning across these lottery boxes, it'll just be flat. It'll just be like a uniform prior. But imagine that after choosing a box yourself, you felt more likely to win with that box that you chose. And I'm going to color your subjective probability of winning after choice with the option that you chose, blue. Whereas after just being randomly assigned an option, you did not feel that way. I'm going to color your subjective probability of winning after no choice, so after like a random assignment, red. Now, this could be an example of a case where we could argue that choice did something. Choice caused an illusion of control because there was no illusion whatsoever before choice, but there is an illusion after choice, but there's still no illusion after random assignment. So this is an example of a case where you could argue that choice did something. Choice caused an illusion of control. But now imagine that before even doing anything, so before even choosing or being assigned a box, you felt like some of these boxes were more likely to win than the others. So for some reason, if you were taking that thought experiment with the boxes seriously, for some reason you felt like it was this first box that was the winner. Well, what's going to happen if you have a choice? You'll probably choose that box that you consider most likely to win. So in that case, overall, you'll feel more likely to win. Your subjective probability of winning is going to exceed the objective probability of winning. But what's going to happen if you don't have a choice? So you're randomly assigned one of these boxes. In that case, you may not end up with that box that you consider most likely to win. So in that case, overall, you're not going to feel particularly more likely to win. So your subjective probability of winning is not going to exceed the objective probability of winning overall. Now, in this case, if you just look at the blue bar and the red bar, it might look like choice caused an illusion of control, but really all it did was it just reflected people's pre-existing illusion. Now, again, if you just compare the blue bar and the red bar, you can't tell which one of these is going on. In fact, both of these are valid explanations, but the literature has neglected the possibility that even when all the options are identical, people could still have this illusory belief that some are better than the others. And so they've only considered the first one, the choice causing an illusion of control, as like a valid explanation. So given these issues, we have two research questions. One, is the evidence even consistent with a choice-driven illusion of control? That is, can we even find a pattern that looks like this once we really measured subjective likelihood and once we really manipulate only choice? The other question we had was, is choice causing this illusion or reflecting a pre-existing illusion if we can find a pattern that looks like this? So to answer these two questions, we ran a series of experiments. I'm just going to show you a subset of the studies addressing each of these questions today in the interest of time. And perhaps a good place to start is to show you one of our earlier studies from when we're just trying to find evidence consistent with a choice-driven illusion of control. So I'm going to show you one of our earlier studies with a lottery. So this is a very close replication of some old studies showing illusion of control. So in this study, we gave participants a lottery with these 6 numbers. One of them was the winner, and if you get the number that's the winner, then you'll win a bonus. In the study, we randomly assigned participants to either the choice or the no choice condition. In the choice condition, we asked people to choose a number themselves. And in the no choice condition, we gave participants like a randomly assigned number. And after their numbers are selected, we gave them a 50-cent bonus, and we asked them how much of this bonus are you willing to wager on your selected number? And the measure was incentive compatible. The idea here is if choice is really causing an illusion of control, participants in the choice condition should feel more likely to win. And as a result, they should be willing to wager a higher amount of money than participants in the no choice condition. So I'm going to show you the result from this study. Again, the dependent variable is the amount that you're willing to wager on your selected number. And we're expecting that if choice is causing an illusion of control, that amount should be higher in the choice condition than in the no choice condition. So in the choice condition, on average, participants were willing to wager 21 cents. In the no choice condition, on average, participants were willing to wager 21 cents. And in case anyone's wondering, this difference is not significant. Are there questions so far? All right, I'm going to move on. So having seen these results, I was expecting that you would have lots of questions actually. What if you try something different? So for example, what if you use a different outcome measure? So instead of capturing these wagers, what if you assess people's subjective likelihood or their subjective confidence in winning these lotteries? Or what if you use a different probability structure? Because everyone knows the objective probability of winning in these die roll games. So what if you use a more complex risk? Or what if you use even ambiguity where the objective probability is unknown? Or what if you use a different type of lottery? Perhaps you want to use a lottery with number 7, because that's usually people's lucky number. Or what if instead of these dry numbers, what if you use these vibrant colors on a spinning roulette wheel? Or further, what if you don't use lotteries at all? Maybe you should use stimuli for which people's subjective preferences matter more. So what if you give people a set of identical looking chocolates and see if people who have a choice feel more likely to select a better tasting chocolate than people who did not have a choice? You might also be wondering why we have this whole list of crazy questions, and that's because we tested them all. So we ran all of these studies. In fact, we ran even more studies to see if it can even find evidence consistent with a choice-driven illusion of control. All of these studies were pre-registered, and they're also, relatively speaking, high-powered. So we try to make sure that we had at least 150 to 200 participants per experimental condition. And to put things in perspectives, that could be up to 10 times the number of participants in some past research. So I probably won't have the time to go over the details of all of these studies, but I do want to show you the results.
Joowon?
Yes.
Before you show me the results,
yeah.
I don't actually understand how the chocolate study worked. And can you take 20 seconds to describe what that design was?
Yes, so we had like an online version and a laboratory version. Perhaps a laboratory version is sort of more ecologically valid, so I'll describe that one. So in the lab, we gave participants a set of identical looking chocolates in front of them. And we asked them, and we randomly assigned participants to either the choice or the no choice condition. And then in the choice condition, participants could choose a chocolate themselves that they want to taste. In the no choice condition, they were just randomly assigned the chocolate that they're going to taste. So we would tell them, oh, you're going to taste the first chocolate. And then we asked them, by the way, how much do you think you're going to enjoy this chocolate? How good do you think this chocolate's going to taste? And then so we sort of like measured like the predicted satisfaction with their selected chocolate. And we also, another thing that we also did was, well, maybe it's not about like the prospect, maybe it's this like post-consumption experience that matters. So we also asked them after tasting the chocolate, did you enjoy the chocolate that you tasted? Did it taste good? And what we found was that there's basically no difference between participants who chose a chocolate themselves and participants who are just randomly assigned a chocolate. So it's like it's in concept, it's very similar to a lottery study. It's just as the stimuli happen to be chocolates and the dependent variables happen to be not like a likelihood measure, but more like your satisfaction or the taste with the chocolate that you selected.
Thank you. Can I ask a small follow-up question to that? So because so my intuition about where, based on your setup, where this is going to go is that there will be lotteries where people have beliefs about before they start about what they like. And if you'd asked me ahead of time, I would have thought things like chocolates would work pretty well there, where barring some manufacturing perfection, some chocolates are slightly bigger than others or might look slightly bigger. Or if they're guessing about what the filling is, maybe people have lay intuitions that, oh, this is the one with nuts, but that's the one with caramel, or something like that. And so again, in prospect, I would have thought things as ambiguous as foods, chocolates, would have fallen in the category of something where people could come in with small but persistent beliefs about which chocolates actually are better. But in your setting, you find that it looks more like just a set of numbers 1 through 6.
Mhm.
or something like that?
Yeah, so there's one thing that we should keep in mind, which is in these studies, we're trying to control for preference matching. So for example, if we have a bigger chocolate and a smaller chocolate in front of people, and then if we give people a choice, of course, people with a choice are going to be better off because they get to choose that bigger chocolate, whereas people in the no choice condition may end up with like a smaller chocolate. So that's going to become sort of like a more obvious benefit of choice. What we're trying to investigate here is that really absent those kinds of preference matching, where people sort of like getting the better outcomes, is there an effective choice as previous research argued? So this is just another way of for us to test that. And so in our studies, we sort of try to make sure that there's not too much variation among the chocolates, but it's still interesting that even there's no effective choice, right? Because you might have think that even though they look identical, you could have thought that, oh, this first chocolate for some reason looked better, but we still don't find the effects of choice in these studies. Another thing that's even more interesting in some sense is we also had a third condition in those studies where we asked people, by the way, you're about to taste one of these chocolates. Do you want to choose it yourselves? The majority of participants actually don't want to choose. It was about 60% of the participants that refused to choose. And then they said, oh, I'm just going to taste one of those like randomly assigned chocolates. So that's even the interesting part here. It's like you might have expected these benefits of choice or people even wanting to choose, but we don't even find that pattern. So that was kind of interesting to us as well.
That is interesting. So I've been
Yeah.
working up a question inspired by my kids and my recollection of multiple situations where like I knew if they were choosing between broccoli and carrots, they would choose carrots.
Right.
But if I asked them, what do you want, the broccoli or the carrots? They would eat the carrots more happily than if I said, eat your carrots. And so that led me to speculate about like psychological benefits of feeling in control and having a choice. You're saying that in your studies, your subjects, that when you asked them whether they wanted control, they said, nah, no, thanks. You pick for me.
That's exactly right. And we were surprised as well. One thing that I want to comment on about sort of like, so in your situation, I wonder if there's something about, I don't have empirical evidence to speak to this. I wonder if there's something about sort of like a more attitude toward the person who gives us choice rather than just like feeling in control itself. So for example, if somebody's like forceful and then asking me to eat the carrots, I'd be like no, like why would I have to? Whereas like if somebody's like, oh, you can either eat this one or that one, it's like you sort of like soften and you're like, you become more amenable to that kind of like a suggestion, right? So I wonder if there's some sort of like an inference that people make about people who give us choices. What my research is saying is that there's not really seem to be any sort of like an illusory control that people get from having these choices. And again, I'm not saying that choice is bad or anything. It's just choice obviously has like a good benefit where it does allow you to the option that you want. But absent that, is there really like a strong benefit of choice in that it's sort of empowering you with a sense of control? I don't find strong evidence for that.
Joowon?
Yeah.
A question came up about replicating the original stimuli or the stimuli from the original papers. I think I know the answer, but I'd rather you answer it because you know better.
Sorry, what was the question?
Sorry, the question is actually, did we try to replicate using the original stimuli? I broadened that myself to say, have the original stimuli been replicated by us or others?
Let's see. I'm not aware of like the exact replication to the original studies. There were some later studies that try to replicate them conceptually. One of the issues is, for example, like a sample size. For example, I'm aware of one illusion of control study that had 5 people in it. I also know that a lot of the later studies also modify the original stimuli such that it's not exactly lottery tickets with famous football players, letters of the alphabet, it's more dry numbers, or it's not about like the reluctance to sell or exchange your ticket, it's about sort of people's like subjective likelihood and stuff like that. I don't find strong evidence that people were successfully replicating them if you're sort of taking away all those like confounds that we mentioned before. I could tell you that most of our studies are conceptually like a very close replication of those studies. So this lottery setup, some tickets, but not measuring this like reluctance to sell or exchange ticket, but more trying to measure like a likelihood related construct. So yeah, conceptually speaking, I think we did sort of like a decent job at trying to replicate them. So that would be sort of my reading of the past studies. I think I'm going to move on just to show you guys the results. So here was a result from our first study. See that it wasn't significant. Second study, not significant. Third, not significant, not significant, not significant. And you see that this doesn't even have like a positive mean difference. It's a negative mean difference. Not significant, not significant, not significant, and not significant. Oh, I'm sorry, not significant. So we couldn't find evidence, despite all these things that we tried, we couldn't find evidence that people who had a choice felt more likely to achieve the better outcome than people who did not have a choice. And again, what's interesting about all of these results is that the mean differences aren't even directionally consistently positive. Some of these studies have like a positive mean difference, others have a negative mean difference. And then even within the same study, when we use multiple dependent variables, some of them are positive and others are negative. So we really don't even think that this is like a problem with like an insensitive measure. And we also even have studies that explicitly sort of like rule out that kind of like an explanation. And all we could see was we tried a lot of things, but we couldn't find evidence consistent with the choice-driven illusion of control.
Joowon?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking back to something you said at the beginning, one of the alternate explanations you said, which was active involvement. And I'm wondering if something about that could cause an effect on one of these TVs that you're testing. And so maybe it's something like the more you physically engage with the task, or the more you physically touch the task, or even just the more you think about what choice you're going after, maybe that causes some sort of effect where you feel more involved, or you feel like there's a sunk cost. And on certain measures, you look like that you do not want to move away from, or your choice is a preferred choice. Does that make sense?
It does. And that's certainly an interesting question that we thought about. So in our studies, I guess the ones that have like a little bit more active involvement is the one where people are choosing like a chocolate, or the ones where people are looking at these colors on a spinning roulette wheel. Although we don't do anything more than that, just because we're focusing on choice. There are some studies that try to separate choice and other kinds of active involvement. So choice is people choosing a lottery number themselves, and active involvement would be something like, oh, I'm clicking the button to stop the roulette wheel, or I'm spinning the roulette wheel myself, things like that. The evidence is very mixed. So there are studies that say neither choice nor active involvement, they don't have any effects on people's sort of like subjective likelihood. There are studies showing that, well, choice does something, but active involvement doesn't do anything. There are also studies that say, well, wait, did I say choice does something, active involvement doesn't do anything? There are also studies that say the opposite. Choice doesn't do anything, but it's the active involvement that does something. There are also other studies that talk about how choice increases people's prospects of winning, but it doesn't increase people's bets. Whereas active involvement increases people's don't increase people's prospects of winning, but it increases people's bets. So the evidence from past research seems to be very mixed. So that's sort of like where I think, it's unclear to me whether like there's like a consistent evidence that says, active involvement is more likely to sort of like lead to these kinds of beliefs or not.
Yeah, just to follow up on that a little bit.
Yeah.
I think if, let's say, there was like a spinning roulette wheel type of game, and my number had been picked for me already, but I had active involvement where I could spin the wheel. There's something, even though I didn't have choice over the number, that active involvement may make it more fun. That's not necessarily a DV, but that may change my experience of the act itself, and I may bet more money, or think about my prospects differently.
That's right. I think you're totally right. So it could be that spinning a roulette wheel myself is so much fun, and I trust myself better then these experimenters, for example, who could, who may not have like the best incentives for me at heart. Even choice can be fun, right? Picking a lottery number yourself could be fun. So I agree that there are cases where having a choice or having like an active involvement can be fun. It's unclear to me though that whether this kind of sort of like an action leads to like an increased likelihood. Like unless people are thinking that, I have my best interest at heart, so I'm gonna do my best. Whereas like experimenters may not. So there's like an incentive misalignment problem. Unless it's that sort of like a more rational belief, I don't have strong evidence that says involvement actually leads to sort of like increased likelihood of winning for people. All right, so these are the results that we found in our earlier set of studies. And having seen this, we were just going to write a paper that makes this point. We can't seem to find evidence even consistent with a choice-driven illusion of control. And we'd actually finished writing up the entire manuscript and then we're about to submit it until we thought, if we're going to write a paper that makes this point, if we're going to write a paper that says we can't find evidence, let's try to be complete. And so let's just run one more study. Let's just run one more study to complete our project, and you see where this is going. So in that study, there was a plot twist. Almost as shocking to me as the one I saw in this movie, because in that study, I saw significant effects. And just out of warning, just in case anyone hasn't seen this movie, this is not a spoiler. This is not the plot twist for this movie. It's just for our research it was. So I'm going to show you where we found those significant effects. I hope everyone's curious. So it happened in a study with those boxes that I showed you. So in this study, we had participants play a lottery with boxes. And one of them is a winner with a bonus and the other one's empty. And if you get the box with the bonus, then you'd win the bonus. So we again randomly assign participants to either the choice or the no choice condition. In the choice condition, we asked participants to select a box themselves. In the no choice condition, we gave them a randomly selected box. After their boxes are selected, here's what we did. We asked people, please let us know how likely it seems to you that each of these boxes contains a bonus. We highlighted people's selected boxes, although we also have a version where we didn't do that, and that makes no difference. And what participants did, what they did was they entered a probability estimate for each one of these boxes, and the probabilities had to add up to 100%. So from a normative standpoint, the correct answer to these questions would be just like a uniform distribution, like 50-50, because you don't know. And in fact, a majority of the participants give us that answer. That's just a uniform distribution. So about 70-80% of the participants give us that answer that's just flat. But interestingly, there are always about 20-30% of the participants who give us a distribution that's not uniform. But their responses are often sufficient to drive significant results in aggregate. So I'm going to show you the result from this study. Again, the dependent variable is the probability estimate that you assign to your selected box, whether you chose it yourself or whether you randomly assigned it. Here's a result with 2 boxes. So you see that people who chose a box themselves assign a slightly higher probability of winning to their selected box than people who are just randomly assigned a box. Now, you might be getting curious, well, what about 3 boxes and 4 boxes? And you'll know by now that we have you covered. So here are the results with 3 boxes and 4 boxes. You see that in these studies, overall choice participants assign a slightly higher probability of winning to their selected box than the no choice participants. Now, some of these effects are only marginally significant, and they're not huge effects. But since we at least found evidence looking consistent with a choice-driven illusion of control, we wanted to tease it apart to see if choice is really causing this illusion or if it's just reflective of people's pre-existing illusions. So how would we tease these 2 apart? We've already learned that we can't do it by just comparing the blue bar and the red bar, because they're going to lead to the exact same patterns. Instead, what we should do is to compare these bars. What these bars represent is the average probability estimate for the box that each participant considered most likely to win. So the average probability estimate for the box that each participant considered most likely to win. Or I'm going to call that the average of the highest probabilities assigned in that condition. What you see is if choice is really causing any new illusion, that highest probability should be higher when people had a choice. So in the post-choice condition, than when people didn't even have a choice or before they were like choosing or randomly assigned a box. So that probability should be higher in the post-choice condition. But if you find that those probabilities are just the same, you'll know that choice doesn't do anything other than just giving different conditions different things. So this is what we tested in our next studies. In our next studies, we again use a lottery with boxes, but instead of 2 conditions, we randomly assigned participants to one of 3 conditions. So there are pre-selection condition, post-choice condition, and post-no choice condition. In the pre-selection condition, we ask people to rate these probabilities before choosing or being randomly assigned a box. In the post-choice condition, we ask people to rate these probabilities after choosing a box themselves. And then in the post-no choice condition, as the name suggests, we ask them to rate these probabilities after being randomly assigned a box. I'm going to show you what the probability distribution looked like in each of these conditions. I'm going to start with the pre-selection condition. What you're going to see is an ordered probability distribution. So what I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you that average of the highest probabilities. So at the average probability estimate for the box that participants consider most likely to win on the left side, followed by the average of the second highest probabilities, and then the lowest probabilities. So it's not probability estimates for the leftmost box, middle box, rightmost box. It's the ordered average probability distribution. So what you want to look for is the leftmost bar, the average of the highest probabilities in that condition. So this is what the distribution looked like in that condition. You see that this is already not uniform. Before doing anything, people already have this illusory belief that some options were more likely to win than the others. Now, it's worth noting that this isn't representative. This isn't a modal distribution. So 80% of the participants give us a distribution that looks more like 33, 33, 33. But the 20-30% of the participants that are giving us distributions that are not uniform, they're driving these results. So they're making the aggregate distribution look non-uniform. Now we'll see what happened in the choice condition or the no choice condition. So does this distribution change when people had a choice or when people were randomly assigned a box? Here's a distribution in the choice condition. And here's a distribution in the no choice condition. These distributions are identical across conditions. So no pairwise comparison of any of these 2 bars is statistically significantly different. So looking at these patterns, we're concluding that it's unlikely that choice is really causing any new illusion. It's more likely that choice is just simply reflecting people's pre-existing illusion.
Hey, Joowon.
Yes.
Do you mind if I hop in? This is Dan. Super interesting. Like, I really like this type of insight, right? It's sort of hiding in plain sight in some sense. Have you given any thought to whether the fact that a person knows that choice is coming, their opportunity to make a choice is coming, causes them to start to psychologically differentiate the alternatives, which pushes their beliefs about the alternatives apart, and then they select on it? I'm not saying this isn't like an alternative explanation, but I'm kind of curious if you've given thought to the psychology of knowing the choice is coming and that whether that actually contributes to some of these effects.
I had that thought as well. So maybe there is really like an effect, but maybe people already sort of intuit that choice will be coming. What I would have expected that in that case, the pre-selection condition and post-choice condition look similar, and they're different from the post-no choice condition. So that's what I would have sort of expected in terms of like the results. What we try to do to try to minimize that risk in our studies is that in the pre-selection condition, we actually don't even tell them whether they're going to be choosing or not. So this is certainly before we randomly assign them to either the choice or the no choice condition, but we actually don't even tell them that you're going to be choosing. So hoping that, it's still, MTurkers may still be expecting that, oh, they're giving me a lottery, they're describing a lottery, so I'm going to be participating in it. But the best we could do was just to tell them, like, don't tell them anything. So that's sort of like what our pre-selection condition is, which is sort of like what we could try to do to minimize that risk. So based on these results, I was saying that it's more likely that choice is simply reflecting a pre-existing illusion. And that sort of leads us back to the bigger questions that we had early on. That is, remember the two questions we had, is the evidence even consistent with a choice-driven illusion of control once we try to capture more likelihood and once we really try to isolate choice? And the other question we had was, if the evidence is consistent with a choice-driven illusion of control, can we tease it apart? So our responses based on this evidence is, the evidence is rarely consistent with a choice-driven illusion of control. We don't even find evidence like, yeah.
Sorry, finish your, finish your thought, sorry. Just finish what you were saying, sorry.
Okay, yeah, so the evidence is rarely consistent with a choice-driven illusion of control. And if it looks like it, it's not because choice is really causing any new illusion, but it's because choice is reflecting people's prior beliefs. Yes.
Sorry, I was trying to remember, and I went to the paper, I couldn't quickly find it. So in all of your experiments,
yeah,
people don't have very strong preferences, right? They're nearly indifferent between the options. Do you have any where they have, like, going to like Dawn's example, like if you had chocolate or carrots or something like that?
We have not done that. I know, so not the studies in this paper, but our original motivation for this paper is to look at contexts where people are either choosing or having the choices made by algorithms. So I'll explain how they're relevant. So what we initially started working on is, let's say there's like two different investments. So for example, one that's like a high risk, high return, the other one that's like a low risk, low return. Is there a difference when you make a choice yourself versus when somebody is randomly assigning you to those options, or when an algorithm is choosing it for you? And I would say those options are pretty different, because one is high risk, high return, the other is low risk, low return. What we were finding was, as long as you control for preference matching, so as long as everyone gets what they would have chosen anyway, there's basically no difference, like as a function of these different selection mechanisms. So that's something that I know from my own empirical studies. In these studies, though, because we're trying to look at contexts that are sort of beyond preference matching, controlling for preference matching, you're right, in these studies, there's not a lot of huge variation among different options.
Do you want to have
yeah.
I'm thinking about the percentage of people who do not believe the probabilities are uniform. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering about these people.
Yeah.
For instance, are they more likely to play the lottery? Are they more likely to gamble? Do you have much information about who these people are, or what their reasons are, or anything else?
I was wondering the exact same thing. So I think there are multiple things. So we try to see if there's like a variation as a function of like the covariates, like age, gender, education. I don't find a consistent effect there as well. I thought at least maybe education would have an effect, but there's no consistent effect of any of these covariates on those illusory beliefs. One thing I found out though that was kind of interesting was, if I'm giving them sort of like a multiple choice, kind of like a lottery, where there are these like two people, one person wanted to choose, the other person did not want to choose. Which one of these people do you think is more likely to win? The majority of people will say that they're equally likely to win, but there would be people that'll say, oh, well, it's the person with a choice, or oh, it's the person without a choice. There's about an equal share of them. These are the people that are more likely to have these illusory beliefs. But if you look at also their responses, they're pretty unintelligent. So it's not like they're saying that, well, I know for a fact that, like, for example, a lot of the lotteries have like the middle option as like the winner, and that's why I thought that it's the person with a choice that would win, or that's why I thought that there are these like illusory priors. That's not what happens. If you look into their written responses, a lot of the things that they say are, oh, I thought it was a person with a choice that would be more likely to win because choice is more fun. Oh, I thought it was a person with like a randomly assigned lottery option that would be more likely to win, because aren't winners randomly selected anyway? So a lot of their written responses to why they think that there are these sort of like differences between choice and no choice, they're kind of hard to understand, but I do know for a fact that those are the people that are also more likely to have these illusory beliefs. Now, this isn't to say that I think those participants are participants who necessarily don't understand instructions or anything like that. I think that if you're also engaging in that thought experiment I gave you with the boxes, I think all of us could sort of relate to that feeling where, you know, cognitively speaking, you know that that's not what it is, but for some reason you still feel like it's this middle box that's going to win. So it's that sort of like a spontaneous belief that we can develop at any moment that can lead to these kinds of priors. All right, so we answered these two questions. The evidence is rarely consistent, and when it seems to be, it's not because choice is causing any new illusion, but it's because choice is reflecting people's pre-existing illusion. And that also brings us back to some of the bigger questions that we had, which is, well, what exactly is the benefit of choice beyond preference matching, beyond just giving people the better options that they prefer? Previous research suggests that beyond allowing us to get what we want, choice also has these powerful effects through an illusion of control. What our research is finding is that choice simply allows us to get what we want. It's just that we just happen to neglect the possibility that even among these functionally identical options, some options to us look more appealing than the others. Now, what are the implications of this research? Well, the first thing is that we need to think carefully about the benefit of providing choice. I think in some sense, the literature has sort of oversold the effects of choice. So for example, according to previous research that talks about illusion of control and choice. If you're, for example, like an investment manager, you should give investors choices, even though they're totally inconsequential, because, you know, even these inconsequential choices can make them more optimistic about their financial returns and also make them invest more money. Our research is saying that you can't really seem to expect those benefits from providing people with inconsequential choices. It's probably either the belief that people already have, or it's a more consequential choices that can sort of lead to these benefits. The other thing that we need to think about is the way we study the effects of choice. So choice is a very important concept, but there are challenges to understanding it through research because it necessarily serves as like a selection mechanism. So we're finding that what we saw was a powerful effect of choice is in fact only happening because choice is serving as like a selection mechanism among different options. And we're not even the first or the only people to make this point. There was a paper that talked about how what was thought to be sort of like a choice-driven spreading of the alternatives, so like people liking an option more after a choice, that was only happening because choice is again serving as a selection mechanism, teasing apart two different groups of people, one that was already more favorable to the option and the other who wasn't. There's also another paper by 10 actually, that talks about how what looked like a choice-driven over-optimism, so people feeling more optimistic about an option after choice, that happens because people are just choosing the options that they were already optimistic about. So we kind of need to think carefully about how we're going to study the effect of choice when that can serve as like a selection mechanism, either among different people or different options. Now we try to yeah.
Is this an okay time to so I think there's a couple interesting things that I'd love to hear you weigh in on. So like one is this kind of mechanism is very undermining to certain things, but it also shifts attention to like, it becomes very interesting what generates the spread in beliefs in the first place, because whatever is doing that will actually generate this. So I think that's kind of sometimes interesting, sometimes uninteresting, but I think that's where I was getting at with my earlier question about the anticipation of choice, maybe actually helping to contribute to this or not, but you know, probably yes. The other thing I'd be kind of curious to hear you weigh in on is if you were now to talk to the next generation of decision-making scholars interested in the psychology of control, what kind of stuff would you nudge them towards, right? Would you push them towards thinking about, well, it's not really about the actual value of it, it's going to be in persistence as a DV. I'd be kind of curious now that you are so deep into this, where do you think the space is to kind of grow this literature?
Yeah, I think, so I'm going to try to answer your first question first, because that was exactly what I was going to talk about, which is, even though we really try to provide like a comprehensive investigation into this, we still don't have like a clear answer to what's making these pre-existing illusions more likely, right? So I know that within some of our studies, there can be some factors that are contributing to people developing or reporting these beliefs towards sort of like the later studies, you know, the one with the boxes and the one where people are rating each and every one of the options on a probability scale as opposed to these like sort of Likert scales. And, you know, what I found is that when you're rating each and every one of the options on a very granular probability scale, there's still only one correct answer and every other combination is like a wrong answer. So the ratio between sort of like the correct answers and the incorrect answers may be something that's sort of making people more likely to develop or even report these illusory beliefs. Despite that, again, like I said, I don't have any sort of like a systematic understanding of what's really causing these illusory priors. I've even been asked if I think that this has to do with like CRT. And I think that there are elements of CRT in that there's like a correct answer and there's sort of these like incorrect answers that people are more drawn to. What I think is sort of like peculiar about this one though, is that I don't know if this is something that's going to go away with reflection. So for example, if I'm thinking harder about it, it's possible that, oh, this is like a correct answer, so I'm going to approximate that. But it's also possible that as you think more about this, you could be like, no, wait a minute, like it was like this first one before, so maybe it's this like middle one this time. So it's unclear to me what the nature of these existing beliefs is. The other question, maybe this is also related to Dan's second question. So where would I say sort of like the future generation of researchers to go? So there are two things here. One is, how do we study choice? The other one is, how do we sort of approach like illusion of control? In terms of the way we study choice, I think there are actually good ways to study the effects of choice beyond preference matching. And, you know, one of them is actually used by Berman and Small in 2012, where people are still getting the option that they wanted. It's just that the perception of the choice mechanism is different. So there are methodologically clever ways to sort of get around it to study the effects of choice. In terms of the illusion of control is also a way where other people can sort of like study and dig deeper into, because literature points to a lot of factors that can lead to illusion of control. So there's choice, there's competition, familiarity, practice, involvement. We're just saying that choice is probably unlikely to cause an illusion of control, but there are many other things that can sort of like inflate people's sense of control. That said, probably another thing that we should keep in mind is Don's paper, where there's some argument about how an illusion of control could be just like a regression toward the mean. So a lot of the illusion of control studies only look at contexts where there's no actual control. So if you ask people to estimate their control, they can only overestimate it. But if you bring them to contexts where the actual control is high, then people just underestimate it. So it's more like a regressive estimate rather than like so it's more like a statistical artifact rather than like an actual effect. So maybe those are some of the things that people might want to keep in mind or just be aware of. But yeah, that said, I think there's still plenty of directions. I think that's about it. Are there any questions that I should answer for the remaining minutes? Also scroll through the Q&A.
There are a bunch of questions in the Q&A. Jay Rousseau asks, might active involvement have an effect if occurring so he outlines a scenario in which active involvement might have a role to play. And you had mentioned involvement and distinguished it earlier from choice making. Can you comment a little bit more on that and whether you think, what does involvement mean separate from making a choice?
Yeah, so the way the literature defines involvement, I think, is, I'm not saying I endorse this definition, is it's the resolution of uncertainty. So for example, after choosing a lottery option yourself, how do you resolve the uncertainty about the winner? Well, you roll the dice yourself. So that's how involvement is defined usually. And there are many things that can count as like an active involvement. Again, the effects on the active involvement on this sort of like a likelihood beliefs, I think it's unclear because they really have sort of like the mixed evidence in terms of like the direction of the effects. I guess like another thing I also want to say is that there's also this study that talks about how even the effects of active involvement go away if you participate in like a repeated trial. So if you're just doing it one time, you might have this sort of like an illusory belief that you're more likely to realize your preferred outcome. But second, third time as you repeat, your estimates actually sort of approximate the actual control. So that's maybe something that the literature has spoken as well that might be helpful in understanding this. But yeah.
Well, that seems like a good place for us to stop. Thank you, Joowon, for such an interesting talk. Obviously, lots of engagement from all of us, but also from our audience. And thanks to all of our panelists for being here today. This has been a lot of fun. The seminar series will continue on through the semester. We hope to see all of you here again soon. All right, thanks everybody. Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you. All right.